It is 8 o'clock. I want to welcome you all to a meeting of the Village of Nelsonville Zoning Board of Appeals. And I'd like the board to introduce themselves, starting from left to right. Chris, you want to start?
Good evening, Chris Keeley.
Peggy Clements.
I'm William Wright.
Steve Miranda.
Judy Meyer.
And tonight we're here to discuss the cell tower, and it's going to be a working session rather than an actual, we're not really going to vote on anything, but we'd like the applicant to identify themselves.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Robert Gaudioso with the law firm of Snyder and Snyder. I represent Homeland Towers, LLC, and I also represent New York SMSA Limited Partnership, doing business as Verizon Wireless. I'm joined by Mr. Daniel Laub from Cuddy and Fader. He represents the other co-applicant, New Singular Wireless, PCS LLC, doing business as AT&T. And I also have with me this evening Mr. Manuel Vicente. He's the president of Homeland Towers.
Thank you. I also want to thank the town of Phillipstown for lending their hall to the Village of Nelsonville. And Pauline, thanks for organizing the meeting as usual. What we'd like to do, just procedurally, what we'll do tonight, and we don't have a microphone, so raise your hand if we'll try to talk loud. What we'd like to do tonight is have the applicant run through all the different exhibits that you've brought and are required to bring to the village. You're looking for a special permit. Cell towers are allowed in the Village of Nelsonville, subject to a special permit, subject to a bunch of prerequisites that a lot of them have been submitted, and we've had a chance to look them over. You're also looking for a zoning variance for access to the site. We'll deal with that at a later time. And procedurally, what we'd like to do is you give your application, the board itself will comment on it, questions and comments, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Some of you have signed up for speaking tonight in favor, or if you want to make a statement, or if you're against it. There's a sign-up sheet. We'll go in the order of the sign-up sheet, and then if anybody else has any comments, they may step forward also. So, anything else that we should address before we get started? So, let's get started with your presentation, and you give your presentation. We'd like to make sure that you have all the submittals that are required, and we're going to hire a third-party consultant to review them. Since it's such a technical application, no one on the board or most people in the community aren't familiar with cell towers and the issues that surround them. Not only the heights, the cell tower that you're submitting does meet the height requirement. There's setback requirements and all. You can go through that, but there's other issues that I'm sure we'll hear from the audience that you can address. But first, present to us, we'll ask the questions, and we'll have the audience speak to it.
Great.
So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, the applicants are seeking a special use permit from the zoning board for the wireless communication facility that's proposed at 15 Rockledge Road in the Village of Nelsonville. The applicants are also seeking an interpretation whether a variance is required for not having access on a public road pursuant to New York State Village Law, Section 7-736, and if a variance is required in your opinion, then we respectfully request the variance. As you mentioned, the facility is a wireless communication facility, including a monopole that we've proposed to be designed to resemble a tree at the property. The property is approximately 9.63 acres in size. We do meet the 110-foot height limitation. That height would allow Verizon Wireless at the top slot on the tower, and then AT&T on the second slot. It would also allow at least two other wireless communication carriers to co-locate on the tower in order to promote co-location and avoid the proliferation of additional towers. We are also offering to Putnam County, because we understand they have a need for emergency services, space on the tower at their pleasure. The tower also includes at the base of it a equipment compound that's surrounded and secured by an 8-foot chain link fence. The compound's approximately 3,250 square feet. It's accessed via an extension, a gravel extension to the driveway that goes to Rockledge Road and ultimately to Moffett. We've submitted, as you mentioned, a number of different application materials that I'd like just to run through. We did submit the application fee and the application forms along with the authorization from the property owner, Mr. Logan. We've submitted what we call an antenna site FCC radio frequency compliance assessment and report. And as you may know, the issue of radio frequency exposure is federally preempted, provided the application meets the FCC guidelines. And in this case, what we did is we had a third-party engineer prepare a report based on the FCC's approved methodology. We looked at the current proposal. We also looked at the possibility of there being a full build-out with 2 other carriers and the county. And the application and the proposed facility does meet the FCC limitation. If the FCC limitation is 100%, we are at approximately 2.76% of that limitation. So the facility complies with the FCC regulations by a wide margin. We made a filing with the FAA, and the FAA confirmed that the facility does not require any FAA lighting or marking, and it will not be a hazard to air navigation. We did a structural certification letter from our professional engineer detailing what are the applicable structural codes and how the tower would ultimately be designed to, again, be able to support that co-location. We had a radio frequency justification report prepared by Mr. Panesso. Basically, the issue in that report is the need for the facility to provide wireless service in the area, including throughout the village of Nelsonville. And a large part for AT&T is being driven by the fact that they lost their existing site at Butterfield Hospital. We also performed an alternative site analysis, and before we came to your board with the application, we literally scoured the area. We looked at available properties, we looked at the zoning code, and just a few highlights of that. The zoning code permits, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, the facility in the Mountain Residential Zoning District, subject to various setback and height limitations, which we do meet. It does not allow these facilities in the VR, VB, or C zones, and therefore we eliminated those locations. We looked at both the cemetery and the town of Phillipstown DPW property at Fishkill Road, 50 Fishkill Road, and the property owners there were not interested in leasing space to us. We also looked at some of the other code requirements. For example, there's a requirement that there be a 50-foot vegetative buffer around the facility, and this particular piece of property at 9.63 acres does have that buffer, and we propose to maintain that buffer, whereas many other properties will not meet that buffer. There's a 300-foot setback from a habitable structure. We do meet that with this application, and there were many properties throughout the village that did not, and we highlighted those in the alternatives report. There was also a lot size requirement of being 1 acre or the underlying zoning requirement. Again, many of the properties do not meet that 1 acre requirement, but this particular property does. So what we did in that alternative site analysis is we laid out some of the code features and some of the other requirements that led us to this particular piece of property. We submitted a full environmental assessment form. We also included a visual EAF addendum. We did a letter from our title company explaining and attaching the deeds and the easements to show how we do get legal access to the property. We did a visual resource analysis from Saratoga Associates, and what they did is they actually took photographs while there was a leaf-off condition, and they also analyzed the area from a planning standpoint, and they looked at all the various visual resources in the area. They used computer modeling for a number of those locations to show, by way of computer modeling based on the photographs they took, what the proposed monopole design to resemble a tree would look like from various locations. And finally, we submitted the site plan, and some of the highlights of the site plan are that access drive with underground utilities that I mentioned, the fact that we meet the 150-foot front yard setback, we meet the side yard setback, which is 125% of the height of the tower. In this case, that would be 137.5 feet. And again, we meet that setback. We detailed any of the trees we'd have to remove, detailed the compound, detailed the grading plan, and showed a profile of the proposed access drive. There are no wetlands on the property. We do propose to remove 47 trees, but we do also propose to maintain the remainder of the trees on the property. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions the board or the audience may have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Now, you did have there was one typo in this, it's not an affidavit, but an opinion from the CBRE.
They had noted 150-foot
Right.
tower, because they were looking at it as a worst-case scenario.
Worst case?
Yeah, that's why
Okay.
they did the 150.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, one question that I had, and I'm not sure that it was in the this packet of site plans, this camouflage tower, is there a specification for it? How would you, I would imagine the village is looking for a very dense camouflage. And is that something that you can describe, or do you have a spec for that?
Sure, we could certainly provide something from one of the tower manufacturers that we use. Homeland Towers has prepared many of these types of facilities over the years. Quite frankly, the product itself has improved greatly over
Right.
even the last few years. We had one approved in Westchester County in North Salem, which is an area that really fit with the wooded nature of the property, and we did a tree by a particular company, Sabre Industries, and we did a tower of about the same height. I think it was a few feet taller. And what we did is we proposed a branch pattern that would be a little bit offset. It would be based on a branch pattern that was a branch type and pattern that was specifically recommended by that company for this particular area. A color of the monopole itself, which I think was a thunder brown color. But we can certainly provide some of those specific details to you.
Yeah, we'd probably like to see a visual of it, to understand the density of the branches, how you might camouflage.
Sure.
Tenants, that might be a good thing for not only us, but for the residents to see.
Absolutely, we have no problem providing that.
Sure. Right, you guys want to start at random, or? Yeah.
I have a question on the security.
Sure.
That you're gonna put up there. You have security fence. You say it's gonna be 8 foot high.
Correct.
What other type of security are you gonna have around that area? It's in the woods. It's not accessible to, basically everybody won't be walking by it every day.
Sure.
What other type of security is going on that property?
So all of the equipment, AT&T has a shelter and Verizon has cabinets. If those cabinets or that equipment is opened, it's monitored 24/7 at their operations center. Alarm goes off and personnel are dispatched. So we do have that ability to monitor it. If anything in any way whatsoever is tampered with that equipment, we know about it.
Are there gonna be any kind of cameras or anything on the site?
We weren't proposing cameras. We've had situations in the past where neighbors in particular have actually been concerned about cameras for privacy reasons, but we didn't particularly propose any cameras, but it's certainly something we can
Just
take
something
into
on-
consideration.
Thinking about
Sure.
because of the location
Absolutely.
and it not being truly close accessible to, the police department, the sheriff's department, and excuse me. Then the state police are not gonna be driving by this thing every day.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and that was one of the benefits of the property, is that it's a 9+ acre property, and it's in a densely vegetated area, and I do appreciate your concern.
How much traffic is there on 15 Rockledge after it's constructed?
Very little. So it's an unmanned facility. Typically, unless they're doing a modification to the equipment, which is rare, maybe it happens once every couple of years. Typically, it's monitored remotely, 24/7, and typically they will go out to the site. We say approximately once every 6 weeks. It's probably a lot less than that.
Is that the only access to the tower is through Rockledge?
Correct. And I would encourage the board, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to jump ahead, but if you'd like to have a site visit, we'd be happy to host you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
before we start,
Absolutely.
go to the next meeting.
Sure. In your alternative structure analysis from June, you described the conversation that you mentioned around reaching out to the landlords on Fishkill Road at the DPW, and you were saying that they were not interested.
Correct.
It also said that you were seeking to again contact the supervisor to determine whether the town's position had changed. What has been the progress since late June on that?
So we did meet with the supervisor and the town attorney, and they said they may be interested. I think it really is a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. We don't necessarily know whether that's a better alternative from your perspective. If it is, it's something that we would certainly, be agreeable to putting more effort into that. If you said to us that that location's a dumb location or more intrusive, we would certainly take your guidance. But if the board thought that that was a less intrusive alternative and worthy of additional follow-up, we're not opposed to that.
My understanding was that if you had looked at it, that you would need to submit to us documentation showing the exact location of each site inventoried, latitude, longitude, ground elevation above sea level, height of the structure and the tower, the accessory buildings, that you would have actually provided that in the packets you already provided. So have you looked at those facilities and considered them already? It sounds like you've already explored that consideration, but the documents were not included?
So there's two different issues going on. One is, if I believe that information is required specifically for existing towers, existing locations.
It's in the section for new towers.
But what I'm saying is that to look at existing tower sites, and those existing tower sites are all detailed both in the alternative site analysis and the RF report, meaning that there's no existing tower surrounding this one within that 2-mile radius that both AT&T and Verizon Wireless aren't already on. So the other properties that we looked at, that we identified as being not landlord feasible, were the cemetery and the DPW property.
All right, so we could take a look into that one. I read it differently, but let's take a look into that one. And also, my understanding from the zoning code was that if you've had communications with other locations, you need to submit the written documentation of those requests. In this scenario, I'd assume that would be the emails between you and the town describing those requests. I didn't see those submissions as part of the package that I reviewed.
We can certainly document it. I don't have any problem with that.
Is there any reason why Butterfield Hospital did not continue with the antennas over there? They just couldn't make a deal?
Because
It's gone.
it's gone.
gone.
Yeah, because it's gone, basically, because they took down the hospital.
There's a new facility there. So
That'd be, NYP, New York
Right.
Presbyterian.
There you go, Presbyterian, right.
Yeah, it's my
Okay,
understanding,
just because
it had to be
that-
removed and that was part of
entity
it.
went out of it, no longer.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And that impacted AT&T. Did that also impact Verizon?
No, Verizon was not located there.
So there's a new need for Verizon.
Correct. There's a continued need for Verizon. There's a new need, I would say, for AT&T.
Is there a need for Putnam County Emergency Services? You're offering that to them? Is that like you said it's free of charge, or however you said it?
Correct.
Have they expressed an interest?
Yes, they have.
And is anyone, they have, you
Yes.
spoke to them?
Yes, we have.
It would be a benefit to the community.
Absolutely.
to have
And we can certainly further document that,
that. Right.
at their discretion. We have had conversations with them. I believe you're aware of or if not, we can certainly submit it. There was a report done a few years ago about the lack of emergency service wireless communications, particularly throughout this area. I think that's driving their need both for their trunking system, but also they have a project where they're installing microwave backhaul to give them redundancy, and we're working with them on other projects as well, and they have expressed a specific interest in this location.
Okay. Any other questions from the board?
No, I don't have anything right
I
now.
have one
Yeah,
more.
go ahead.
My understanding was that that as part of your application, you need to submit current FCC licenses that
Correct.
authorize
Yeah,
this.
I didn't see,
I-
I didn't see that
I
either.
think they may have been included in the radio frequency report,
Correct.
and there's 11 of them that are included.
Yeah,
but
there's a whole listing of them.
5 of them, if I understand it correctly, 5 of them are expired.
They're
They
constantly being
expired in
renewed.
June 2017,
Yeah, they constantly automatically renew. We can certainly pull up the most
but it
recent
didn't.
ones.
This one has not automatically renewed. This one expired in June.
No, what I'm saying is they put an expiration date, but they automatically renew. We can certainly find the most recent copies if they've expired since the engineer put it together.
I mean, this was submitted in July, right?
Yeah, I'm just
Or,
saying.
excuse me, this was submitted on June 9th.
Yeah.
Okay, so it expired 18 days after the submission?
Yeah, what I'm saying is I'm fairly confident that there's an updated one that's publicly available.
Okay,
We
yeah,
can
we'd like to see
certainly
that
provide
going forward. Great.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna hire a consultant to do a deep dive into, to check all the boxes to make sure everything that is required to be submitted by the village has been submitted, and Chris has mentioned a few things that seem to be missing. There was a very extensive package that was submitted, so there may be a few things, that you haven't done, and we'll get back to you on a report with our consultant that makes that list.
And we have no problem working with
Yeah.
you, Mr. Chairman, as
Yeah.
far as if you want
That
additional
should be easy.
information.
I mean,
that's
I think the
reasonably
quality of
required.
the submission was, again, we're not experts, but it was pretty thorough submission, but we'd like to make sure we dot the i's, cross the t's. And, we do have this site plan. The trees you're cutting down are necessary because of, just to get the road in, it appears.
Yeah, we did a tree removal plan on sheet ZB4,
That's the
and
one.
that's the location of the access drive, and then the equipment compound.
Right, you probably think the planning board makes that closer, so. I know you have to go to the planning.
I
board.
overlooked that before. As a matter of fact, I meant to mention that, yes, we also require site plan approval from the planning board.
Right. So there'll be, we're interested from a zoning standpoint.
This is the tree removal
Right,
listing here,
okay.
and the X marks.
Yeah, so we showed existing trees, but we also showed with the X, you're correct, the trees to be removed, and then we detailed.
From what I read when I went through it,
Yeah.
yeah. Concerned me about the number of trees being taken down, because there's a lot of old standing wood up there,
Understood.
you know. I know that a lot of the people in the area like the trees, and it's good for the environment, so.
Absolutely, and one of the benefits too, again, is that the trees that we don't have to take down, we propose to preserve. So, we show on the plan, the 50-foot vegetative buffer, that we're not touching, and I'm sure we can certainly discuss, maintaining other trees as well.
And you're gonna lease this land from the, you're not the owners, you're.
We will either have a lease or we'll have an ownership interest in the property, but we will have a tangible property interest.
Any other questions from the board?
Sorry, one more.
Yes.
So
Go ahead,
the,
yeah.
again, on the radio frequency report, this was done by Pinnacle Communications, right?
Which one are we talking about? There are two reports.
From
One is
June 9th.
the
RF report for AT&T.
that was done on behalf of Bechtel through the gentleman, Mr. Daniel Panesso.
And my understanding from our code is that the consultants need to be qualified in the field of telecommunications and radio frequency.
Yes.
And approved by the Village of Nelsonville. Have they been approved by the Village of Nelsonville?
Well, I would say that to the extent that that code provisions requires some type of approval, I'm not sure who it requires approval from, and I'm not sure what the
Approved
standards
by the
are.
Village of Nelsonville.
And I would say that we believe that Mr. Panesso is clearly a qualified telecommunications
I don't
expert.
doubt the qualifications. I'm just asking if he was approved by the village.
Well, I don't know what the process is of approval by the village.
All right, so
so
we'll figure that out.
Yeah, we'll,
And then also on the view shed analysis,
Mhm.
which I thought was incredibly helpful. Thank you for submitting that. My concern was that my read of the code is that it had that view shed assessment shall be approved by the zoning board prior to preparation. Zoning board shall direct the applicant to provide public notification of when that view shed would take place. My understanding is that did not take place. That
Well, we're not saying that we are opposed to doing another analysis. What we wanted to do specifically is provide an initial analysis, particularly with photographs with the leaf-off condition.
Oh,
If
okay,
you'd
so
like,
then we would
if
set
you'd
this
like,
one aside
if you'd like to
going forward.
schedule a balloon test, now the one caveat I'll give is that, and we can certainly visit the property together. It will be very difficult to float a balloon on that particular property without taking down trees in advance. And I'm not saying that we're not
I
willing
don't
to do
doubt there's
that.
considerations. I'm just asking. if he
But
was
we're
approved.
happy
Okay.
if you wanna have a publicly scheduled balloon test, we're happy to accommodate you in that regard. We can tell you this, that the renderings that were prepared, including the photographs without the rendering showing the location, is much more accurate as far as the location of where the tower would be and the height than the balloon test.
No, I did absolutely find it very valuable.
Yeah,
In my
so-
read of the information, it was a very valuable addition. I'm just asking.
And
if
we're
they
happy to
approved it.
follow
Sounds
the
like
code,
they-
and if you
okay.
wanna have a balloon test, whatever methodology that's reasonable that you would like to have, we're happy to accommodate.
And then last question, and I think I'll be quiet after that. The max height under our code is 110 feet.
Correct.
For a tower like this.
Yes.
Why do you need the max height?
Because there's really two things going on. There's trying to cover a gap, and there's also trying to connect with surrounding sites. The reality is, if it wasn't 110 feet and it was 150 feet, we'd probably be proposing 150 feet to look at it. But we are just about connecting over in the area of Jaycox on Route 301 with existing sites. That's like a big connection point between sites in Phillipstown and this proposed site in Nelsonville. So if you look at the maps carefully, you can see that area right, particularly at that bend around that turn, difficult topography. At that height, we are barely making that connection. and your engineer, I'm sure, will take a look at that.
Thanks.
Well, thank you. Before we move on,
No, I'm good.
before we move on, Mr. Lusardi is our village attorney. Anything we missed, if I could reach out to you?
Well,
Right.
just a couple comments at the present moment. There's a statement made about where cell towers are permitted in the village and where they're not permitted in various zoning districts. Do you have the section that you're referring to? Because I can't find that in my copy. What do you,
Oh, yeah.
People can't hear.
I'm sorry, I was just asking the sections of the zoning code that council was referring to as to only mountain residential being the area, the only area where cell tower is permitted.
I didn't say it was the only area. I said that there were 3 other zones that it was not permitted by special permit.
Okay.
I just need the section of the zoning code. If you
Yeah,
can-
I'd like to have the pleasure of taking a look at the code a little more carefully rather than just
All
trying
right,
to spit
yeah,
out a code section.
And when it talks about and again, we haven't really had a cell tower application previously, to my knowledge, so we're kind of going through this for the first time ourselves. But the question about this inventory, that goes to the essential issue of need, the need for the tower and so forth, and the ability to co-locate. And I'm referring to section 188-68, 2, on page 18848 of the statute. It says the application shall include a report with an inventory of all existing eligible tall structures and existing or approved communication towers eligible for co-location within a 2-mile radius of the proposed site. The site inventory shall include a map showing the exact location of each site inventory, including latitude and longitude, degrees, minutes, seconds, ground elevation above sea level height of the structure and/or tower, accessory buildings on the site. The report shall outline opportunities for shared use of these facilities as an alternative to the proposed new communications tower. The report shall demonstrate good faith efforts to secure shared use from the owner of each potential existing eligible tall structure and existing or approved communications tower. The report shall document the physical, technical, and/or financial reasons why shared usage is not practical in each case. Copies of any written request for co-location and responses thereto shall be submitted to the board. So, the question is, it sounded to me that you had interpreted this section as simply saying in the village of Nelsonville, there's only a particular zoning area where you can install a cell tower, and therefore we didn't look at anything else. Is that what you're saying, or are you saying something else?
No, quite to the contrary. Shared use of an existing facility means that there's a tower, and the code is saying if you can go on that existing tower and co-locate, you should do that first. And if you're not doing that, you should inventory those locations within that radius. And if you're not doing that, you should provide all the information about those locations and give the reason why you're not doing that. What we include in both the alternative site analysis at Exhibit A, which is the June 28, 2017 report from Mr. Vincent Xavier from Homeland Towers, and also on page 2 of the RF report from Mr. Pinesso, what we do is we include in the maps attached to his report and in Exhibit A, the alternative site analysis, is the location of all the other existing co-location opportunities within that 2-mile radius. Actually, we go much further than that. We go about 10 miles. And the fact is that both AT&T and Verizon are already co-located on all of those towers. So there is no other alternative location that's an existing site for us to co-locate on that we're already not co-locating on. And even with co-location on all those surrounding sites, we still have a significant gap in service in and around the village of Nelsonville. So I think we've clearly responded to that section. If there's a site that's not listed on Exhibit A of the alternative site analysis, which is this map here, which includes the locations, or on the coverage maps as detailed in Mr. Panesso's report, which are all the green dots within that 10-mile radius. If someone has a location, we'd be happy to look at it. But we believe we have every single location because we're on all those locations, both applicants. Going back to the question about that you initially asked me for was the code section, I think you have to look at section 188-22. And I believe when you look at that section, which is basically the use table, you can see the zones where communication towers are permitted and not permitted. And as I mentioned before, I think it was the VR, the VB, and the C zones.
I mean, well, all right, I don't know if I'm looking at the same document as you are, so,
What page are
but
you on, sir?
if you could give me, you don't have to do it now, I don't mean to put you on the
No,
spot.
it's 18811 is the page number,
Okay.
if I'm working. That's Schedule A, permitted use by district.
Okay. That B10 you're referring to?
I'm sorry, B10.
Commercial.
No, yes,
communications
B10,
tower.
so if you look, it's, as an X under VR, which is not permitted. There's an S under SR, an S under HR, an S under MR, and an S under MF, which are all special use permits. And then VB and C are also X. So as I mentioned before, VR, VB, and C, there's an X, meaning that it's not a permitted use in those zones.
All right, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4 zones in the village where a commercial communication tower is permitted by special use permit. I probably misunderstood. I thought you had said that it was only permitted in a mountain residential when you made your initial comments, but I may have misunderstood.
No, so what we did is Exhibit B to the Mr. Xavier statement, alternative site analysis. We color-coded the map. So just to run you through that, what we did is we color-coded in blue the VR, VB, and C zoning districts, and we put a notation under there: towers not permitted by code in these zones, pursuant to section 188-22, as you mentioned, B10. Then what we did is we highlighted in, I'll call it orange, the location of the cemetery and the location of the DPW yard as not available for lease. Then we noted in green the nature preserve area. And then what we noted in yellow, which was areas or particular properties that we believe do not meet other code requirements, whether it be the lot size or the 50-foot buffer, and or both. So basically, if you look at those other lots, they're either very small or they don't have that 50-foot vegetative buffer that this particular 9.63 acre property does have. And we concluded that therefore those would be more intrusive than the proposed site, pursuant to the zoning code.
So they had to meet all the criteria in the statute for you to consider the site.
So we meet all of the criteria under the statute, and therefore we believe that our site is less intrusive than any site that doesn't meet the criteria.
Well, you don't necessarily meet all the criteria of the site that you're proposing either, right? You're looking for a variance. So I guess the one question we have to think about, is whether or not there's another site available, and maybe the answer to that is no. But is there another site available here within the 2-mile radius where, or even within the village of Nelsonville, where with a variance, the cell tower could be located, provided that variance was granted? I mean, you're potentially looking for a variance here, right, for lot frontage and so forth, and access. So even this site doesn't meet all the criteria.
Well, let me clarify. Number one, this site meets all the criteria under your communications tower ordinance.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, we're asking for an interpretation whether it needs a variance under New York State village law for access to the property. To do anything on the property, it would require that variance if the zoning board deems that a variance is necessary. Without that variance, then the property would have no value whatsoever because it would be unable to be built. So I think that's one issue. The second issue is, I believe that we made a good faith analysis of the potential alternatives. We've submitted that to the administrative record. I think if the board believes that there's a less intrusive alternative and would like to specify that to us, we are certainly ready, willing, and able to evaluate it.
But in terms of negotiations for other sites, how many other sites did you negotiate for here?
Well, we specifically had discussions on the cemetery and on the town DPW property.
All right, so 2 others.
2 others.
All right, they didn't work out.
The landlords were not interested.
So they just wouldn't, they refused for any price, they wouldn't.
I don't believe it was a matter of price, it was a matter of that they were not willing to rent space to us.
Except you said that the town has possibly reconsidered.
What I said is that I met with the supervisor,
Uh-huh.
and he said, maybe we'll look at it again.
Okay.
And if you look at the affidavit, we described in some level of detail, how we had made very good faith efforts to communicate with them, and quite frankly, they failed to communicate back. So the fact that now one person on the town board says, we might be willing to look at it, I think has a long way to go. And again, as I mentioned before, if this board, felt that that was a less intrusive alternative and wanted to take that position, again, we'll be happy to do the additional legwork.
And do you have
Okay.
a comparable level of ownership and control of the land we're discussing here as the DPW lot, as an example? A comparable, which is none at this point?
No, we have no level of ownership or leasehold rights with the DPW property.
But you move forward with an application to us, but not to.
No,
not regarding DPW or-
we have a legal document that gives us a right in this particular property.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, Robert, Mr. Lusardi, thank you.